Founders of Alexandria. By Star Scribe. Part 7. Founders. Chapter 3. They were all there, the day they had the vote. Everyone but Alex, unconscious as she was in a hospital bed. There were no more attempted suicides, not now that the shock of having odium gone for good was finally over. That left Alexandria with a problem, of course. What could they do with a dozen ponies that had tried to take over? Mariah participated in several of the proposals that were made, just as all of them did. Rather than keep all of them locked up in little cells during the week or so it took them to work out what they would do, Cloudy Skies helped the ponies move into the high school gymnasium, which they kept locked. No pony resisted. None of the recovering ponies seemed to have much in the way of willpower left, really. Odium had taken it, claimed it for himself. It was only the beginning of what he had cost them. Oliver didn't know if those ponies would ever be fully independent again. What have you decided? True Sight, first of the cultists to be free, seemed to speak for them now, though they were actually three distinct groups. The equestrian ponies numbered about 9, plus another 5 humans that had been captured in Philadelphia. Another 3 were ex-military human ponies, part of Abrams's band. Evidently they had been recruited when their convoy met up with the ponies leaving Philadelphia. As a result, they were the most intact, since they had only been under odium's control a few weeks. Even so, there was an empty look in their eyes whenever Mariah looked at them. The 3 separate groups sat a little distance apart from each other in the gym, all surrounding the table where the ponies of Alexandria sat. Well, most of them. Alex remained unresponsive, possibly brain-dead. Oliver still didn't know if she would ever wake up, despite all the medical magic he could pour into her as she slept. Mariah wore her prosthetic horn all the time now. It took enormous concentration and effort to actually use the damn thing, but it was getting easier every day. Another few months, and she might be able to lift multiple objects the way Joseph could. Joseph had taught her daily for more than half a year, but Mariah would always think of magic as the first gift her little parasite had given her. Then again, she supposed he was responsible for that too. Cloudy Skies had led their meetings in Alex's absence, just as she always did. When speaking with other ponies though, it was Mariah who rose to her hooves. We have. She lifted a piece of paper, and tried to make her voice as official as she could. Refugees and former slaves to the spirit odium, we have reached our decision about you. We considered your proposal, and considered a few other options. She tried to linger longest on those words, since many of the other options had come from her mouth. Some had been accepted. Most had not. The ponies of Alexandria have voted unanimously to accept your request to join our settlement as permanent citizens. She tried to meet each set of eyes for a second, like she imagined Alex might do. We will work with those who were living in temporary housing before to find somewhere permanent to live. Those who wish to change their housing arrangements may also do so if you wish, using one of our trailers if you want water and electrical, or any home in the city if you don't. We will discuss at a later time the ways in which you might contribute to our city. We do expect, however, that each of you will contribute to the degree you are physically and psychologically able. We also understand the mental and physical trauma you suffered was severe. We hope to offer you all the support we can, so long as you choose to live with us here in Alexandria. She fell silent then, waiting for their response. The dozen ponies muttered in hushed tones for a few minutes. Mariah could have strained to hear them if she really wanted to, but she didn't see the point. She made quiet conversation with Joseph until Carol stood up again. We are all very happy you decided to accept us. I know how hard it must be, after the way we treated your hospitality last time. That won't happen this time. We're grateful you've given us another chance. Mariah admired Carol's discipline, and not just because of her delivery now. She had heard her impassioned pleas in the last few days, about how winter was coming up and some of her ponies could barely feed themselves without help, so complete had odium's damage been. Of all those that had been with the cult since childhood, Only Carol herself seemed intact for the experience. She hadn't been willing to talk about why. Mariah nodded, and proceeded to explain the rest of the plan in detail. How, for the next 6 months, each of the ponies of Alexandria would take one of the most helpless of the immigrants into their homes, and care for them in addition to their other responsibilities. Even Mariah with a heart of iron had wept when she considered the horror of these ponies' experiences. Those worst off, though adults, had an independence and level of development equivalent to a young child. There were 4 such cases. She knew the torture Odium's voice could bring, and she had felt it for less than an hour. The thought of the horror it might work upon someone in a lifetime she could scarcely comprehend. The human ponies, for all their shock and confusion, seemed to have emerged relatively unscathed. She listened diligently as each in turn answered their questions about their skills and training, doing so honestly this time. It was about the best list they could have hoped for. A few paper wranglers, a truck driver, a policewoman, a high school teacher, and an electrician. That last guy was going to be a celebrity if he ever got his crap together. Oliver was too busy caring for Alex to cook like he used to for these big dinners, so they had to make do with a large pot of Sky's everything soup and the greens she had gathered that morning from Oliver's withering garden. It was enough to feed them all without delving back into canned food, so it would have to do. When all was done, when she and Joseph had made room for their 2 new guests, when the new ponies were asleep and the stress of the day was finally over, Mariah dragged him away from his game and into the waiting car. She didn't tell him where they were going, which he took to mean she had entirely the wrong intentions. On any other night, she might have found the idea of going somewhere secret by the dark of night with her lover very, very interesting. Not tonight, though. Given the reason for this conversation, she couldn't have had less interest in sex. She took Joseph to her secret place, where the tiny patch of forest met lake. It was very beautiful there, though they had to use their horns to light their way. She had picked up on the light spell in the last few days, which came from the tip of the prosthetic even though it was just wood. That seemed strange to her, but she wouldn't question it. What mattered was that her magic was finally working. Lose it on her very first day as a unicorn, and it took getting knocked up to finally bring it into focus. The world wasn't fair. Joe, stop. She gave him a shove with her magic this time, the only sort of touch he seemed to understand. It was always easier to get through to Joseph when magic was involved. She shoved him against a tree and pushed him into a sitting position. She never could have done it if he had been resisting, but he didn't. He never did. What? He looked like he genuinely had no idea why they were here. Was that possible? Mariah's magical senses were feeble even with the prosthetic, but she couldn't not sense the foal, no matter how hard she had first tried not to. As it got larger, it was becoming more difficult. It wouldn't be long now before it was going to be obvious she was carrying a passenger, 11-month pregnancy or no. Better now than Oliver's hints he was going to tell instead. It's about that, but it's not that. She dropped to the ground, taking several deep breaths. She didn't close her eyes though, for fear she would see what Odium had shown her, her own death, alone and unloved. Damn that monster if it thought she was going to let its prognostications come true. She twisted sideways, putting a little pressure on her belly. Even with her baggy sweatpants, she expected this would be enough for him to understand. We should have been more careful, Joseph. I'm not sure I'm ready to start a family. The stallion stared. From the expression on his face, Mariah knew instantly that he hadn't known. Joe was about as good at lying as Alex, not. He tried to speak, but only weak gasps emerged from his mouth. Eventually he seemed to give up entirely. I thought you knew. My magic. I can sense it. Every day. Every minute. It's the first thing I ever felt, I don't know how, she trailed off, realizing it didn't matter. What did she care why he hadn't realized? It had served her purpose, in any case. It meant she could confront this on her own terms. He shook his head. And no. He coughed and spat, though the subject of something not actually the foal itself seemed to make things easier. Ease him back into the real world. I knew your pattern changed, and it was changing all the time, but I thought it was because you were finally understanding magic. You were levitating. Working on other spells, I expected it to change. Well, it did, and here we are. I read about it. It takes 11 months for a mare to carry a foal to term, if nothing goes wrong. That means we have about 9 left, if I'm working the math right on when it was conceived. She shivered. Even now, the thought of all this female stuff made her uncomfortable. The equestrian princesses would mock her until she died. I guessed I thought it might happen eventually, but it hadn't happened to anyone else. I just figured we couldn't be first. Of course we would be. She glared at him. Joe, who else is active? He had no answer but to strike his face with a hoof. Oh. I guess we should have thought about this. Guess it's a little late for those pills that. Yet. She knew what she was about to say would probably offend him, but she said it anyway. It was better to tell an unpleasant truth than put even more between them. I asked Oliver, there's nothing he can do. None of the books had anything about abortions, and the danger of testing something meant for humans on an alien body. The equestrians don't have birth control. Mariah shook her head, and started to answer, before she shoved him with a hoof. It's a little late to be asking about that now, Joe. We're stuck. Anyway, it'd be selfish of us to try and stop it even if we could. We've already lost Alex. We need every pair of hands. Weren't you the one who ran the numbers and told me that ponies won't return fast enough in our lifetime or several lifetimes after? We have to get the numbers up before all the machines break down. Isn't that what you said? Joe looked down, pawing at the ground and muttering. I didn't think it would be us. Maybe not. She looked up, eyes wide and pleading. Please, Joe. I need you tell me you're not going to abandon me. She reached out for him with one leg, more desperately than she had felt in her life. I needed you back in Los Angeles. I fucking need you now. It's too much for one person. Mariah knew full well what he must be thinking. Joe might be able to understand codes and crack computer systems, but when it came to the rest of his life he was simplistic and predictable. Within his mind, she could practically watch the gears turning as his fear of commitment clashed with his desire for her. Could there be something more in there? Mariah had never imagined she'd felt anything more than what her body demanded she felt. Yet now, as he reached out to embrace her and pull her close, she imagined that maybe, just maybe, she did. For the first time, she was okay with that.